Every morning unfolds the same way, according to a system you didn't build. The morning begins in a house you've come to consider your own. You walk across the floor, open the refrigerator, pick up your phone, check your bank account, grab your car keys, and leave for work. Nothing about this feels unusual because this is what ownership feels like from the inside. The house is yours because your name is on the paperwork. The car is yours because it sits in your driveway. The food is yours because you pay for it. The phone is yours because you bought it. The money is yours because the number appears under your login. That is the surface version of the story, and for most of your life, it is the only version anyone teaches you to see. But ownership is not one thing. It is layered. There is the thing you touch, the debt attached to it, the contract governing it, the infrastructure it depends on, the company that supplies it, the bank that finances it, the platform that controls access to it, and the institution that can change the cost of keeping it. You can hold the keys and still not control the system around the door. You can drive the car and still be paying someone for the right to keep driving it. You can fill a cart with groceries and still be living inside a food chain owned by companies whose names never appear on the package. The strange part is not that someone owns the system. The strange part is that you can live inside it for decades and only notice the monthly payments. Start with the house. The house is the symbol of ownership more than almost anything else. People say they bought a home, and technically they did. They signed documents, transferred money, moved furniture, painted walls, fixed a sink, planted something in the yard. The place becomes personal almost immediately. Your routines attach to it. Your memories attach to it. Your identity begins to attach to it. And then the mortgage statement arrives. For most people, the house is not fully owned. It is being purchased slowly from a bank over 15 or 30 years, with interest layered over the price like a second house you also have to buy but never get to live in. You may have the title, but the lender has a claim. Miss enough payments, and the emotional meaning of the house does not matter. The birthday parties do not matter. The color of the bedroom walls does not matter. The system sees the contract, the missed obligation, the collateral. The house becomes what it always was inside the financial structure, an asset securing a loan. And even after the mortgage is paid, ownership does not become absolute. Property taxes remain. Insurance remains. Maintenance remains. Utility access remains. The house is yours, but keeping it yours requires continuous payments to systems that surround it. Stop paying property taxes long enough, and the house can be taken. Stop paying insurance in the wrong place, and the next storm can turn ownership into a liability. Stop maintaining the structure, and the asset you worked for begins quietly converting itself into future costs. This is the first hidden rule of modern ownership. You do not simply buy things. You buy the right to carry obligations around them. The car works the same way, only faster. You sit in the driver's seat and feel control because the steering wheel responds to your hands. That feeling is powerful. A car gives you movement, privacy, timing, distance. It turns geography into choice. But the ownership chain begins before you ever start the engine. If the car is financed, the lender owns the risk. If it is leased, the company owns the asset, and you are buying temporary access with mileage limits attached. If it is insured, the insurer determines what the car is worth when something goes wrong. If it is connected, the manufacturer may control software features, diagnostics, updates, subscriptions, and sometimes even functions the machine is physically capable of performing. You thought you bought transportation. What you entered was a stack of agreements. The car in your driveway may depend on a bank, an insurance company, a manufacturer, a parts network, a fuel network, a repair network, a registration system, and increasingly a software ecosystem. Any one of these can raise the cost of keeping that car usable. A repair becomes expensive not only because the part is expensive, but because access to the part is controlled. Insurance becomes expensive not only because you are risky, but because the cost of the entire repair ecosystem has changed. Fuel becomes expensive not only because oil moved, but because refining, shipping, taxation, distribution, and margin all sit between the ground and your tank. The object is yours. The dependency chain is not. Then there is food, which feels like the simplest ownership of all. You pick it up, pay for it, take it home, eat it. The transaction is clean. But food is one of the clearest examples of hidden ownership because the brand on the front of the package is often only the most visible layer. Behind it are processors, distributors, commodity traders, agricultural suppliers, seed companies, fertilizer companies, logistics firms, cold storage networks, supermarket chains, private labels, real estate owners, and payment processors. You are not just buying cereal or chicken or coffee. You are touching the final inch of a chain that began far away from you and was priced before you ever had a choice. A grocery store looks like abundance. Aisles of choice, colors, labels, flavors, discounts. But many of those choices converge upward into fewer companies, fewer suppliers, fewer distribution systems, fewer logistics bottlenecks. The shelf creates the feeling of competition. The ownership structure often tells a quieter story. Different boxes, similar shareholders. Different brands, same parent company. Different stores, same suppliers. Different prices, same dependency on the same transportation and commodity systems. This does not mean the food is fake. It means your choice is real at the consumer level and constrained at the ownership level. Both things can be true. You can choose what to buy and still be buying inside a system whose deepest decisions were made by people you will never meet. Now look at the phone in your hand. This one is more delicate because the phone feels personal. It has your messages, photos, passwords, maps, memories, private thoughts, half-finished notes, bank alerts, family conversations, and the exact location of the restaurant you looked up 2 months ago. It feels like the most intimate object you own. But the phone is not just a device. It is a gate. The hardware may be yours, but the operating system is licensed. The apps are permissioned. The cloud storage is rented. The payment system is mediated. The photos may live on servers. The music is accessed through subscriptions. The movies are streamed through accounts. The documents are synced through platforms. The messages move through networks you do not own. The phone is physically in your pocket, but much of what gives it value exists somewhere else, under terms that can change. This is where ownership becomes especially strange. In the past, if you bought something, it stayed bought. A book remained on your shelf. A record remained in your room. A tool remained in your garage. Today, more of life is becoming conditional access. You do not always own the media, you access the library. You do not always own the software, you subscribe to the service. You do not always own the storage, you rent space in someone else's machine. And because access feels smooth, the dependency disappears until a payment fails, a password breaks, an account is suspended, a policy changes, or a feature moves behind a higher tier. You learn the difference between possession and control only when control is exercised against you. Your money has its own version of this. You open a banking app and see a number. It feels like your money because the number is assigned to you, and in normal life, that is enough. You can spend it, transfer it, save it, invest it. But the money is inside a banking system built on permissions, clearing rails, fraud controls, account terms, transaction limits, payment networks, and institutional trust. Most days, this works so well that you do not think about it. That is the genius of infrastructure. When it functions, it disappears. But try to move a large amount at the wrong time. Try to withdraw more than expected. Try to send money across borders. Trigger a fraud system. Lose access to an account. Suddenly, the money is still yours in theory, but access becomes a conversation with a system. A system that may ask you to verify, wait, explain, escalate, submit, confirm, retry. The money did not vanish. Your control became conditional. This is not always sinister. Banks do need controls. Fraud exists. Money laundering exists. Mistakes exist. The system cannot be completely frictionless without becoming dangerous. But that does not change the deeper reality. Your money lives inside someone else's infrastructure, and infrastructure always comes with rules. At the lower levels, the rules feel like walls. Fees, limits, delays, denials, holds, interest rates, minimum balances. At the higher levels, the same system becomes flexible. Limits move. Calls are answered. Fees vanish. Loans become cheaper. Problems are solved by named people instead of automated menus. The bank did not become kinder. Your position in the ownership system changed. You moved from being a small account inside a cost structure to being a valuable relationship inside a revenue structure. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths about ownership. The more you own, the cheaper it becomes to own. The less you own, the more expensive access becomes. Renting is the obvious version of this, but renting is no longer limited to apartments. Renting has become a model for almost everything. You rent housing from a landlord. You rent money from a bank through interest. You rent mobility through leases and subscriptions. You rent entertainment through platforms. You rent storage through cloud services. You rent identity through accounts. You rent convenience through delivery apps. You rent visibility through social platforms. You rent time back from systems that made your life faster and more dependent at the same time. And above all of this are the entities that own the streams. Not always the objects. The streams. A person may own a house. A bank may own the mortgage stream. A landlord may own rental income. A company may own the subscription stream. A payment processor may own transaction fees. A platform may own attention flows. A data company may own behavioral patterns. An insurance company may own premium flows. A fund may own shares of the companies collecting all of them. The modern wealthy do not only own things. They own claims on repeated payments. This is why the world feels expensive in a very specific way. It is not only that prices rise. It is that more parts of life have been converted into recurring obligations. One payment for the house, another for the car, another for insurance, another for the phone, another for internet, another for storage, another for software, another for entertainment, another for delivery, another for healthcare, another for debt. Each one is small enough to justify individually. Together, they form a private tax system built not by governments, but by ownership structures. You do not experience this as a grand system. You experience it as Tuesday. A bill posts. A card renews. A rate changes. A fee appears. A subscription increases by $3. The insurance premium jumps. The grocery total feels wrong. The car repair costs more than expected. The rent goes up. Nothing dramatic happens, which is why it keeps working. The pressure arrives in pieces small enough to be normalized. And somewhere above those payments, ownership collects. This is where investment funds enter the picture. Not because they are a secret room with one person controlling everything, but because modern ownership is often pooled, abstract, and layered through institutions. A pension fund owns shares. An index fund owns shares. A private equity firm owns companies. A real estate investment trust owns buildings. A holding company owns brands. An insurance company owns assets to back future claims. A bank finances the debt. A shareholder receives the return. The owner is not always a person with a face. Sometimes the owner is a structure. Sometimes the structure owns through another structure. Sometimes the structure is owned by millions of ordinary people through retirement accounts, while still behaving like a concentrated force in the market. That is what makes modern ownership difficult to emotionally understand. It is not always a villain in a tower. It is a network of claims, incentives, contracts, and capital-seeking returns. And capital-seeking returns does not need to hate you to extract from you. It only needs to be positioned upstream from something you need. If it owns housing, it collects rent. If it owns debt, it collects interest. If it owns infrastructure, it collects tolls. If it owns software, it collects subscriptions. If it owns distribution, it collects margin. If it owns attention, it sells access to your behavior. If it owns payment rails, it takes a fraction of transactions. If it owns the platform where sellers meet buyers, it collects from both sides and calls it convenience. This is the second hidden rule. The best ownership is often invisible because invisible ownership feels like normal life to the person paying for it. You do not think of your rent as someone's asset yield. You think of it as housing. You do not think of your credit card interest as someone's fixed income product. You think of it as a balance you need to handle. You do not think of your subscription as recurring revenue. You think of it as the app you use after work. You do not think of your data as an asset. You think of it as the price of not having to log in twice. But the system thinks differently. The system sees your life as cash flows, risks, retention, margin, utilization, default probability, lifetime value. You are not only a person buying things. You are a pattern that can be measured, priced, segmented, financed, and retained. That sounds cold because it is cold. But it is also how the modern economy becomes legible to the institutions that own it. They do not need to know your name to understand your category. They do not need to know your fears to price your risk. They do not need to know your habits personally because your transactions already describe them. The system does not ask who you are in the human sense. It asks what you are likely to pay for, how reliably you will pay, and how hard it would be for you to leave. That last part matters. How hard it would be for you to leave. Because ownership is not only about having assets. It is also about creating dependency. The best businesses are not just the ones people like. They are the ones people cannot easily replace. A mortgage is hard to leave. A phone ecosystem is hard to leave. A bank account tied to payroll, bills, credit, and history is hard to leave. A platform with your audience is hard to leave. A city where your job, family, school, and healthcare all exist is hard to leave. The more life accumulates around a system, the more expensive exit becomes. And when exit becomes expensive, ownership becomes powerful. This does not mean you are trapped in every direction. That would be too simple, and it would also be wrong. People do build wealth. People do buy homes outright. People do start businesses. People do invest. People do reduce dependency. People do move from paying streams to owning streams. The system is not closed. But it is tiered. And the tiers are not announced when you enter them. At one level you pay interest. At another level you collect it. At one level you rent access. At another level you own the platform. At one level you buy the product. At another level, you own shares in the company selling it. At one level, inflation is a pressure. At another level, inflation raises the nominal value of assets you already own. At one level, debt is a burden. At another level, debt is leverage. Same tool. Different position. Different outcome. This is the real secret behind the ownership system. Not that nobody owns anything. Not that everything is fake. Not that one shadowy entity secretly holds the title to your life. The reality is more ordinary and more disturbing. Ownership has moved upward into layers most people do not see, while everyday life has moved downward into payments most people cannot avoid. The person at the bottom owns objects and pays obligations. The person higher up owns assets that produce obligations for other people. The person above that owns infrastructure. Above that, capital owns portfolios of infrastructure, debt, equity, land, platforms, and rights. And at the highest levels, ownership becomes less about possessing things and more about controlling the conditions under which everyone else uses them. This is why your house, your car, your food, your phone, and your money can all feel like yours while still feeding systems above you. You are not imagining the ownership. You do own parts of your life. But your ownership is surrounded by other ownership. And the surrounding ownership is often the more powerful kind because it does not need to touch the object. It only needs to control the terms. So the question is not simply, do you own this? The better question is, who gets paid because you need this? Who gets paid when you sleep indoors? Who gets paid when you drive? Who gets paid when you eat? Who gets paid when you swipe? Who gets paid when you store, stream, borrow, insure, subscribe, repair, upgrade, finance, or delay? Follow those payments long enough, and the hidden map begins to appear. Not as a conspiracy. As a structure. And once you see the structure, your definition of ownership changes. Owning a thing is useful. Owning the debt attached to things is better. Owning the platform through which things are bought is better than that. Owning the infrastructure everyone depends on is better still. But the highest form of ownership is owning something people must keep paying for, even after the first transaction is over. That is why modern wealth does not look like a pile of objects. It looks like recurring revenue, equity stakes, licensing rights, land, networks, debt instruments, distribution channels, and platforms. It looks boring from the outside because the most powerful ownership usually does not need to advertise itself. It just waits at the point where payments have to pass through. You go home at the end of the day. You park the car. You unlock the door. You put groceries in the refrigerator. You plug in the phone. You check the bank account again. Everything looks normal because everything is normal. That is the point. The system does not need to interrupt your life to own pieces of it. It only needs to be present in the background, quietly collecting from the things you already believe are yours. And maybe the goal is not to panic about that. Panic does not change ownership. Awareness might. Because once you understand the difference between owning objects and owning cash flows, between access and control, between possession and leverage, you start to see money differently. You stop asking only how to afford things and start asking how things are financed. You stop asking only what something costs and start asking who receives the payment. You stop looking at wealthy people as people with nicer objects and start seeing them as people positioned closer to the streams. That is the shift. Not from poor to rich overnight. Not from consumer to owner in one clean step. But from living inside the ownership system unconsciously to recognizing where the claims are, where the payments go, and which side of the stream you are standing on. Because your life is not secretly owned by one entity. It is more complicated than that. Your life is surrounded by thousands of ownership claims, layered so smoothly into ordinary routines that they disappear. And the moment you begin to see them, the world does not become less real. It becomes more readable.